this is a political prosecution. And when you really break this down, I think it's important to take a step back. Your listeners, and you know this very well, and actually on Twitter last night had a thread, I don't know how many tweets deep, to really do a deep dive into the Second Amendment and why it's a fundamental right. Our founders knew that it was an unalienable right. It predates our Constitution. I mean, we even talk about the glorious revolution of 1689, right? People know that the right of self-defense is fundamental, and it was incorporated in our Constitution. It's in the Missouri Constitution, and it's also expressed in our Castle Doctrine in Missouri, which, as you mentioned, is one of the most expansive in the country. The Castle Doctrine allows you to protect your life, the lives of your family members, your home, and your property in Missouri from these kinds of threats. And so when you know, in a time right now where you see violence spiking, including in St. Louis, I mean, there's a 75% increase in murders in July, this July versus last July. There are already 135 murders in the city of St. Louis. You now have individuals, law-abiding citizens, in that time when people are talking about defunding the police and violent crime spiking across the country, including in St. Louis, individuals, law-abiding citizens, defending their lives and their home, being charged now, being targeted for exercising the fundamental right of self-defense. I felt like it was incumbent upon me as the state's chief law enforcement officer to enter the case and have this case dismissed. I think it's also important to point out one of the reasons why I believe this has an interest or that goes beyond just the parties involved, the McCloskeys. This could have a chilling effect.
Oh, yeah.
A chilling, if you think about it, the government coming in and prosecuting people, maybe going to jail for defending their home and their family. And it's a very dangerous precedent. And so we're coming in with the full weight of this office to try to put a stop to it.
I'm so glad for that, and you're right. It does establish this precedent. I know that the Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner had said that she wanted to do this without burdening the courts, and discussed a method of doing it outside of that. Is that it because she knows that if this were to go the traditional route, that she would not have a victory here?
I can't get in her mind. I mean, it's law, and it's not even a close call.
Right.
As a matter of law, it should never have been brought. Asserting the Castle Doctrine essentially affirmative defense. It is essentially makes this not a crime at all. This would be like there's no distinction between your property and your home here, that if somebody comes in a threatening way, you have a right to defend yourself. And so the felony charge, the unlawful use of a weapon that she's brought forth, the Castle Doctrine is very clear that you know, and the McCloskeys have said they were, you know, being told that they were going to be murdered, they were going to kill their dog, they were going to burn their house down. You know, they were on their way to the mayor's house. The mayor's house has been vandalized several times in the last few weeks. So they were certainly within their rights to defend their own lives and their properties and their property. And that is a right that's extended to all Missourians. And so this doesn't exist in the back. I thought this was a very dangerous precedent to be set, which is why, you know, we're coming in. And again, in a time where you see spiking, you know, violent crime rates across the country, including, so it's just the wrong use of resources. I mean, the idea that the circuit attorney moved this case up to the front of the line when you have all these murders that have gone, you know, unsolved and uncharged is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I read that the firearms that they had, they were not even loaded. Nothing was chambered, and they didn't even have ammunition in the house. How important is that to this case, particularly when Gardner needs to show that they had the ability, the capability of enacting lethal force? I mean, they basically had paperweights.
Right. Well, the other thing that's important to point out, Dana, is because of the Castle Doctrine, it's almost those issues are not really relevant in the sense that you have the right to defend your property and your home and your life with deadly force, if necessary, if that threat is real. And this is a private street. This is private property. This is not a scenario. And I think some people have tried to make an issue. Well, they're just walking by on a street. That's not true. There's no trespassing. This is private property. This is a private street. They were on their way to the mayor's house, but as this is taking place, they have no right to be there. You have no right to be on a private street. And again, listening to the McCloskeys and the threats that were being made, they felt like their lives were in danger. Their home was going to be burned to the ground. And again, this is not just about them. I mean, this has broader implications too, that if Missourians feel like they can't exercise the fundamental right of self-defense, right? Because what we know is that right predates government. And in times especially, you could look through our history where the first line of defense is the individual being able to defend themselves. There's some times that the police aren't going to get there. And if you listen to some people on the left, they don't want them to get there because they want to defund the police entirely. So
right.
We're starting, I think, America and people in this state, I think more and more people are starting to understand the real inherent value of, the right to self-defense embodied in the Second Amendment. The founders knew how important it was. It allowed you to defend yourself and your property. And Missouri has deep roots. That fundamental right is deeply rooted in our Constitution and our laws. In fact, as recently, Dana, as 2014, Missourians overwhelmingly voted to expand those Second Amendment rights. And so that's, again, why we're entering this case. Enough is enough. It's not going to happen on my watch, so we came in the day the charges were filed.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad that you have. I know that the governor has also spoken out about this, said it was outrageous. He would know he was one of those individuals involved with expanding the castle doctrine with this. So at this point, because apparently their firearms are still in possession of Gardner's office or law enforcement, at what point would they, how does this end? Because, obviously she's going to take it all the way through. I think she needs this as attention for her August 4th election. So at what point do they get their property back and their name cleared? And or will she not drop this and keep pursuing it, you think?
It's hard to say. This is going to play out over several weeks. I assume, I don't know this, but I assume the McCloskeys, I think there's a statement from their lawyer that they're going to fight this. We're now in the case. And I think you've followed this closely. That's the one thing people aren't really talking about. She has an August 4th primary.
Yep.
And so not only does she have a track record of making these political decisions not based on the law with who she doesn't prosecute in 2 weeks. And, in our system, the rule of law is too important for this to be hung up with operations of the circuit attorney who has an abysmal record when it comes to actually prosecuting violent crime. And again, now we see that law-abiding citizens are being targeted for exercising their fundamental rights. It's wrong, and the case needs to be dismissed.
Is it within your office's power, or have you considered any type of corrective penalty for abuse of authority as it relates to Kim Gardner in the office of the circuit attorney in St. Louis?
Right now our focus is on this case. There's no question. And by the way, in addition to, she has original jurisdiction essentially to make these charging decisions. Our office doesn't. But we have jurisdiction over all the appeals, which is an important thing to keep in mind too. So the governor's talked about pardoning. We defend the state essentially on appeals that are made. That's another thing that could happen down the road. But I don't think it's going to get to that point, Dana. I really think the law is very clear. It's explicit in Missouri statute that when you are defending your castle, it's not a crime. So the idea that you're brandishing a deadly weapon and threatening others, if you're doing it under the auspices of the castle doctrine, which we very clearly have a case here, that's not a crime. And so she knows that. She's brought this case forward again for political reasons. And again, I think it's important to step in and send a message loud and clear. We're not going to allow that kind of political intimidation when it comes to the Second Amendment.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad that your office is doing that. One last question for you. We're talking to the Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmitt, who last night filed a brief to dismiss these charges brought by the St. Louis Circuit Attorney against the McCloskeys, the couple that was in Central West End. That video went viral. Is there at any point, do you think that, and I don't know, I know we're going to speak with the McCloskeys again, but would they have any sort of legal standing to maybe take action against the city for trying to abridge them or remove from them their constitutional rights?
It's possible. And I think, there's a lot that's going to play out here because, again, all the, of the murders that have been committed, she's only bringing a small fraction of these cases. And if you listen to the police officers on the street, they're bringing cases to that office and they're being turned away. And so it's created a real problem on the streets. It has emboldened criminals. They think they can get away with literally murder, that there's not a lot of repercussions. There's no one's being held accountable. And so, which is why it makes this case even more bizarre that the circuit attorney would bring this case to the front of the line, really, of somebody, defending their home and property. But I'll leave it up to the McCluskeys to form their legal strategy. My job is to represent all 6 million Missourians.
Right.
And the fundamental right of self-defense is something that needs to be fought for. We cannot allow, prosecutors like Kim Gardner to chip away at that. So we're drawing a line in the sand, and I think it's important for us to be committed to this cause.
Absolutely. Well, the St. Louis Circuit Attorney has definitely declared war on the right of self-defense in St. Louis City, and we're glad that the Missouri Attorney General is standing in the way of that and standing up for Missourians across the state. Attorney General Eric Schmitt, we appreciate your time. We appreciate your attention to these constitutional matters, and I know we'll be following up with you if there are any further developments. Thank you so much again. Be safe out there.